Well, hi, gang. I think of communication as a skill. It is really fascinating to me because it is personally a skill that I value so tremendously, partially because it's what's gotten me to where I am today, which is a job that I genuinely enjoy in a field that I really believe in. And so this is probably the first of the lectures that you've gone through. It's the third that I've recorded during the coronavirus quarantine that we are under. And it's really interesting to me trying to take this different approach because I've given a form of this lecture for about 16 years and it feels functionally different. And I think that there's a pretty good reason why it feels functionally different. It's because it literally is. So when we look at the concept of communicating in the 21st century, which is what today's lecture is about, first, I've got to tell you, I think that I do this much better live. If you are watching this in an online version of the class saying like, I think that guy's kind of lame, way better live. It's like Bruce Springsteen. It's a huge difference. I did just compare myself to Bruce Springsteen there. I think that's great. Before we go any further, why don't we just get ourselves started with the lecture. I need to go over here and do a screen share and click that button. You don't know this, but this process has gotten significantly smoother than the first one of these that I did, which you'll probably get a chance to see. It's the perception and self model. So when we talk about the idea of communication in the 21st century, the first place that we got to go is benefits. Quite literally, we can document that you will both feel and physically be healthier by being an effective communicator. Duke University has done a significant amount of research that connects effective communication to better mental health and then connects better mental health towards better physical health. Amy Cuddy of Harvard University can connect your self-confidence almost directly to your nonverbal communication. That being said, Robert Putnam, in his kind of landmark study book, Bowling Alone, determined that the average American man had 0.6 friends, that the average American woman had 1.6 friends. And then Olds and Schwartz, in their book, The Lonely American, went on to suggest that those numbers might even be lower. So despite the fact that communication has a ton of literal physical benefits, it is something that we are doing less and less. Not to mention the fact that communication is a tremendously valuable workplace skill. Show me a job that actually says, you know what, a bad communicator would actually do what we are looking for here. I still have yet to find one. And so as we go through this, let's use Edwards, Wall, and Myers' definition that they have from the communication age, which if this is not the first video that you've looked at, you've seen me mention multiple times, but if it is, the vast majority of my research is taken from their excellent textbook, The Communication Age. They define communication as the collaborative process of using messages to create and participate in social reality. And in order to get to that definition, they have to break down that communication is a variety of different things. And most of these things, if not all of them, need multiple people in order to be able to accomplish that goal. Because they take multiple people, there's a couple of different ways in which we need to approach communication. The first of which is the context kind of by its medium. Obviously, communication, if done in a face-to-face setting, allows somebody to speak directly to another person. They do need to be physically present for that. The second, and certainly becoming vastly more important and in some situations more popular form of communication is mediated communication, meaning that there is something connecting the two people that is not necessarily a small physical space. Literally, this is over the course of writing or the phone or what is happening right now. I'm communicating with you not just over the internet and technology, but through time and space. Like it is right now 12:52 on Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. I have no idea when you're watching this video or under what situation you're watching this video. Did I kind of force you to watch this video? Did I make it an assignment? Are you just some random person on YouTube? Are you my mother-in-law, who is one of my 4 followers on YouTube? As I go through this, who's to say how this communication might get to you? But it's the same concept. I'm about to compare myself to Shakespeare here, that you would read through something like William Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, which was written for a very small group of rich people who were on a very long vacation. And on the 12th night of that vacation, they had commissioned Shakespeare to write a play for them. So clearly you weren't the intended audience for that. But if you happen to see a production of Twelfth Night or read Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, that communication is still getting to you. And it was separated in significant time and in significant space. And it changes that message, which is why things like Shakespearean humor, Twelfth Night being one of Shakespeare's comedy, comes out differently than it does now. Now, to take that context a little bit further, we can look at the size of our crowd. Interpersonal communication, which is by its definition one-on-one communication, is the first place that we're going to go here. And in many situations, it is focused on relationship building. You often, in many situations, are building a relationship through interpersonal communication, and thus you're going to value that a little bit more. Small group communication carries its own unique kind of traits, and in some situations, its own rules. In a lot of situations, those rules are meant on having the group achieve a common goal. And if members of that group are not focused on that goal, it has a tendency to break apart that small group. Public communication, like a lot of our speeches will be done in this class, is attempting to deliver a message to a group of people. It's a little bit more formal. A lot of public communication is based off of one person delivering to a larger scale group. And then also we have mass communication, which does fit into our communication realm, yet plays by, in many situations, very, very different rules than the other aspects of communication that we talked about. Because of that, we don't do an awful lot with mass communication in this class, primarily because it is trying very hard to reach out to the largest group of people possible, and it changes the rules just enough that we don't spend a ton of time with it here. Each of these, though, however, plays by a version of its own model of communication. We're going to look at 4 in this particular lecture. We're going to look at the transmission model, the interaction model, the transaction model, and the model of social construction. First, let's look at the transition model, which is going to take, at this point, let's see if I can use a flyer, a source or a sender. It's going to have a person send a message through a channel to a person. Now let's break this down a little bit. The more we understand our sender, us, the more we can understand how we effectively communicate. Now I have a whole lecture on this later in the class on communication and the self, and things like perception fit into that as well. I'm going to send that to a receiver, and again, to reference another lecture that we have in this class, when we analyze an audience, the more we understand about that receiver, the more likely it is that we can tailor our message towards them. So right now, if we're going to run through this process, through this transmission model, I am the sender of this information. I'm sending a message, which is this lecture, to you as the person who is receiving it. The channel is the medium in which I am sending the message. Currently, I am recording a Zoom lecture. I'm going to take that Zoom lecture, I'm going to upload it to YouTube so that you can watch this YouTube link as you so choose. Now, trying to block me sending the message to you through the channel is a concept called noise. Noise has two different approaches. It can be both physical or psychological, and because of that, it can change our ability to hear a message or our ability to listen to a message if that message is verbal. Now, if we think about it, that listening is a psychological approach as opposed to hearing being a physical approach, the block of that is actually pretty significant. Like, let's say, for example, that your dog is barking while you're listening to this lecture, and it hurts your ability to hear my voice. My message has a harder time getting through, but that's because you can't hear my message. The physical approach has changed. But on the other hand, let's say that you got some particularly bad news before you started listening to this lecture. And that bad news is really kind of taking your focus away from this. Now, that's not hurting your ability to hear the message. It's hurting your ability to listen to that message. So that's the basic transmission model. We advance them with the next three. The interaction model still has a sender and a receiver, but adds a couple of aspects. It adds encoding and decoding, the way in which we phrase a message so that it is most likely to be received. When I first started teaching, I had this really great example that involved Bryan Adams, who was a Canadian rock star, though by today's standards, rock would be a very operative term here. He's famous for singing Summer of '69 and the theme from Robin Hood. He's a popular singer. Bryan Adams, big deal. But now in 2020, a Bryan Adams reference isn't really going to connect with my usual audience of 18 to 21-year-olds. So I might change that particular focus, because you then need to decode that message. And if you're like, who the heck is Bryan Adams? It's not going to have that same connection. At the same point, you can see in this model that it is moving back and forth. So this is now adding the concept of feedback. And feedback changes based off of our context. In a face-to-face environment, I can have things like nonverbal communication back to me. I can also have instantaneous questions. Whereas since I can't see you watching this video, which would be incredibly creepy, I then have to get that feedback in terms of emailed questions or responses to this YouTube video, or maybe if I were to set up group chats based off it, that's how I'm going to get that feedback. Everything else is going to stay relatively the same in the interaction model. Take it one step further, though, and we can see that in the transaction model, these things are all occurring concurrently, that it is essentially one process moving back and forward, that as I send the message, you're immediately decoding it, understanding it in your own terms. You're then delivering feedback back towards me, and that noise is trying to affect this process the entire time. The key with the transaction model is it is going back and forth. Think of it as we're going to take the things that we get from the other communicator, from the receiver, and we're then going to utilize them to continue to focus that message. Now, in the social construction model of communication, it's all affected by the idea of a construction of meaning, the idea of reality. A good way to look at this would be the environment or the context in which this communication occurs. Take, for example, a relationship that I might have with a friend that I play softball with. This is something fun. Up until this year, when coronavirus really impacted many things, but not the least of which was my ability to play the somewhere between 100 and 125 games of slow pitch softball that I've played for about the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm going to approach communication in that format very differently than I'm going to approach communication with the same people in a different format. Take, if nothing else, the volume of my voice. If I need somebody to make a play instantaneously, to dive to a left, or to see that somebody is going in a certain direction, I might yell out at them. If somebody is trying to call off another player, I might yell out like, hey, that's Vinny's ball, or something like that. whatever happens to occur. Whereas if we're talking after the game, I doubt that I'm going to be yelling at the same person. Now, it goes a lot deeper than that because context affects so many different things. History goes into this, gender constructs goes into this. Like there's a ton that goes into this. We're going to break a lot of that down in future videos, but I've been pushing kind of a time limit that I'm shooting for on this. So let's wrap this up. Communication, kind of by its nature, holds the key to a lot of what I think many people want to accomplish in life in terms of relationships, in terms of effective jobs, in terms of self-confidence, and having a base understanding of it and really understanding why we study these things is a good first step as we go throughout this process. Have a great day, guys. Stop the share. This is now the awkward part. We're at a couple of seconds before I stop the recording. Have a wonderful day, you guys.